Thank you for that blessing. Aren't you glad our kids are growing up?
Yes.
And more of them show that they're more talented than us?
Yes.
I didn't hear an amen to that, but we should be glad, right? It used to be that I used to teach my daughter how to play guitar. Now she comes to me and she says, "Dad, not like that." And she shows me how to do it. And of course, I'm not a guitar player. I just know the basics. But it's always nice to see people surpass our abilities. And so we're very thankful that you blessed us with your talent this morning. Before I begin, I want to bring up something to your attention, and I wanted to wait until most of you are here. We're starting our discipleship live groups or live classes this coming week. What those are, for those of you who might not have followed our announcements regularly, those are groups that will get together, spend some time studying some of the core beliefs of the Bible, and then give an opportunity for a discussion, like more of a family informal time, where all those beliefs that are covered, the core teachings of the Bible, will be discussed, just from what do they really mean in practical way for our life, to hopefully have each one of you share some of your experiences about, how have you applied, that particular teaching of the Bible. And so we believe that as Crosswalk family members, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we claim to believe only what the Bible teaches. But many times we feel a bit unsure because we really haven't taken the time ourselves to dig deeper into the Bible. And we want to give an opportunity for all of us, those who know more and those who might have a bit less knowledge of the key teachings of the Bible, to have this experience where your understanding of who God is, the God you believe in, and what He teaches us about life, heaven, death, resurrection, salvation, and so on, will be solidly based on the Bible. So we want to invite you to pick a group and participate in it. We have two groups that are currently have formed and will be meeting. One of them will be meeting on Monday night, and they'll be in our home. We are not going to begin this Monday because of conflict, but the following one, so a week from now. And the other group will begin this coming Friday in the home of Vicky, again, one of our church members. What we want you to do is be sure that we have a kind of a count to know how many people to expect, because we would like to provide lessons for everyone. So if you will be kind enough to either go to send an email to livegroups@crosswalkfellowship.net. By the way, that email will not be active until tomorrow morning, unfortunately. So don't email until tomorrow morning, but send an email to livegroups@crosswalkfellowship.net. You have a little insert in the bulletin that will remind you of that email address. And just let people know how many of you are coming. That's all we need to know, and which study are you going to be a part of. Okay? Or you can do that by just filling out this little form on the bottom, tear it off and put it in the offering plate or the offering baskets as you walk out of this auditorium. So once again, we know how many people to plan for in each one of those locations. Now, there is a third group that's going to be meeting via Skype. If you cannot make it, it's always better in person. But if you cannot make it in person, you can join via Skype. We haven't set a date on that, meeting day on that yet, because we want to see how many people would like to join, and then we'll communicate with you to pick the best possible evening of the week to do that. If you would like to be a part of the Skype group, be sure, and this should be somewhere on this handout. Oh yeah, right on the second column towards the middle, Skype online group. If you would like to join, just request that you become a friend on Skype to Crosswalk Fellowship, Crosswalk_Fellowship. It's all in there. And once we accept you as a friend, you'll get all the communication for that group. We hope you can join. We hope that will be enriching for you. And once again, we hope that through that we'll be encouraged that what we believe in as followers of God and the Bible is solidly based on the Word of God. Let's bow our heads for a quick prayer before we begin. Jesus, thank you so much for bringing us all here today. I pray that your Spirit will be with us as we open the pages of your word, and as we consider one of the most important topics, the topic of influencing others. I ask you to bless us and to guide us through our study today. Amen. He was one of the most famous people in a small village in Bulgaria. Well, maybe not too small, because villages there are bigger than the smaller towns that we have here. People knew him that he liked drinking, and when this guy got mad, you didn't want to be around him. Until one day, this preacher, humble preacher, pastor guy, connected with this famous, in the negative way, I guess, person in my village. And this guy became a follower of Jesus. In fact, people knew that he was so bad that once this whole transformation started happening and he became a different person, they will try to provoke him just to get him to come out of that. Now, you have to realize that this is right at the time as communism is coming into the country. And so they were really trying to push him. And as I remember him telling a story, well, actually his son telling the story, he was very old, and I barely actually remember seeing him alive, but his son telling the story. One day one guy came and said, "Hey, come on, man, just take a break of this God you're following. For 5 minutes, come and let's have the same party we used to." And he pushed him again and again, and the old guy from the church there just looked at him and said, "You know what? If you don't stop, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. But when I take that 5-minute break, you will wish that I never took it, because I'm really going to hurt you." According to his son, that's the last time anyone dared to really provoke him. This guy who accepted Jesus, together with the pastor who wasn't living in that village but was just coming once in a while, to work with the group there of believers, they started reaching out to people. And they found this lady who was quite interested, a lady whose husband had passed away, and she was interested to learn about God and the Bible. She couldn't read. And yet they kept on studying with her and inviting her. Pretty soon she joined a small group in that village. And that humble pastor and this guy whose life was transformed, they kept on just working with her. She accepted Jesus, became a believer, became a Seventh-day Adventist, because the group there was Seventh-day Adventist group, and accepted Jesus. Her life was transformed, and very soon her son married this daughter of one of the most prominent communist families in the village. And in the beginning, the son and her daughter had a hard time really giving their life to God. They'll go, but it was a kind of hard to really transition into Christianity. Until one day, they decided this was it. This was the time for them to step up. Because that same preacher kept coming back and challenging them about what God can do in their lives, how He can transform their lives. They weren't wealthy. In fact, when communism took over the country, they took a lot of the livestock and the livelihood of people away. They basically federalized it and made it a part of the government. And so people were left with hardly anything. They'll have to work only to get a small salary to get by. And so slowly, day by day, the son and the daughter-in-law of this old lady who couldn't read accepted Jesus. Soon they had a baby, and then another one. And they kept on raising their generations after generation to follow the faith of God. Today I stand here, 5 generations later, because of what that preacher with the guy who found Jesus started doing in that village. Amen. I have to tell you, I was going to call my dad and ask, but I didn't want to. I don't know the name of that preacher, the pastor who came initially to the village. And he probably will never know mine until he's in heaven. Because he probably never thought that a simple Bible study with a lady, my great-grandma, who couldn't read, will result in anything more than just another person deciding to follow Jesus. What do we do with the opportunities that God gives us to make a difference in the life of just one person? Imagine that we're in heaven, and I'm going to look for that guy who came and converted my great-grandma. By the way, she learned how to read just so she can read the Bible, and she was, I believe, 49, but she was close to her 50s when she learned how to read. Because she wanted to know how to read the Bible and read a lot of the books that one of our pioneers, Ellen White, has written. And just the impact she has had on the whole family and the transformation is so great that when I get to heaven, I want to see this guy who really was instrumental in converting her. And I'm sure that when I go to him, he'll say, well, I don't know you. Because see, what he was following closely was God's command to continue to do our mission by reaching one person at a time. Because the influence we have on people later on for generations to come is often an invisible influence. We never expect it. We never really think of what the results of our work will be, and yet there are people's lives who are being changed because of that. 5 generations later, we have 3 pastors who worked until recently on 3 different continents. Actually, our generation is 3 pastors. Before that, my dad was the first pastor in the family from that line. He was in charge of all the churches in Bulgaria. People have been influenced by generations to come because one simple pastor whose name I don't even know and a member of a small group decided to reach out. Isn't that powerful? In the Bible, there is a story that kind of emphasizes the power of influence that I want us to dig into today. It is found in Acts chapter 2. And while you're opening your Bible there, we'll start with verse 3. I want to kind of just give you a brief description of the person that you know very well, or at least a brief introduction to a person that some of you will recognize very well. It is Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul grew up in a Hebrew family. His father was a Pharisee. His mom was not a Jew, from what we can tell. But he was very well versed into the faith, into the Jewish faith. As he became a follower of Christ, he became one of the greatest and the most outstanding missionaries and theologians. In fact, to a point that 1/3 of the New Testament is written by Paul. But his beginning was probably not as glamorous and glorious, or the people who reached out to him probably never guessed that Paul was going to become the leader, the theologian that we today go and refer to when we consult, the Bible about what does it what God does really teach about, what does God teach about salvation, about life, about death, about how do we live that and experience that love of God that God has wanted His people on earth to follow. And so, the beginning of Paul, even though it began in a miraculous way, never really foretold of what God was going to do with him to the extent that we know today. So let's go back to Acts chapter 22, verse 3. And we read how Paul describes himself. He says, I'm a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. Under Gamaliel, I was truly trained in the law of our fathers and was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. Here is Paul talking to this group of believers, and he says, hey, I was just like one of you. I grew up here in a Jewish family. I was trained, I was brought up under this guy Gamaliel, and I was trained in the law of our fathers. Later on in Philippians 3:5, in fact, let's go and read that, Philippians 3:5. Paul gives another side again of his training where he specified that he was a Pharisee or trained in the schools of the Pharisees. It says, Philippians 3 verse 5. He says, I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law of Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for legalistic righteousness, I was flawless. So Paul describes himself as someone who was trained in the law of God, in the path of the Pharisees, and he was so faithful to it that he said, I was flawless in living a Pharisaic life. Now, those of us who know about the Bible know that shouldn't be a privilege to claim to be a Pharisee, right? Even though really the Pharisees initially, they had a good desire to become leaders and followers of God, they turned religion into a bunch of rituals. In fact, Jesus had a lot of things to say against the Pharisees, and Paul just found himself to be in that type of an environment. Like most kids who grew with their parents, Paul was influenced since young man by great people, his mom and his dad. Obviously, they took to pride to teach him what they really knew about God, because he said, I became really, really faithful follower. Influenced from the heart of his parents. His father was a Pharisee, and he passed on to him everything he could from his faith. As we said, Pharisees were not the best people to look up to. But Paul did, like many of our young people and our kids do. See, so many times we don't realize that our kids will adopt what we believe if we're passionate enough about it, but only if they see that it comes from the heart. If they feel any type of artificiality in between what we believe and the way we live, they'll never follow us. And it is obvious from this text that Paul's parents were people who lived what they believed from their heart. Interestingly enough, going back to Acts chapter 26, Acts chapter 26, give me 1 second here. I think that's a mistake. Should be chapter 23. No, chapter 26, verse 5. Again, another reference. Paul says, they have known me for a long time, referring to the people he was trying to witness to, and they can testify, if they are willing, that according to the strictest sect of our religion, I lived as a Pharisee. In the context here of Acts 26, Paul was trying to say, hey, I was a child who gave everything I could in what I was taught. But once again, Paul was not taught the best stuff, right? I mean, if I came and I told you, I'm a Pharisee, I want to teach you the Bible, would you follow me? Not after you know from Jesus, right? But at that time, Paul was clueless about it. Even though he had heard about Jesus, he followed what his parents shared with him as the best. I want to just insert a quick lesson here as before we continue on with the story, that many times our influence on our kids will not be the best influence because we are perfect people. It will not be because we always teach the right thing. It will not be because we always take the right approach, but it will impact them if they know that we teach them from our hearts. Anything you share with your kids, Even the things that they'll look back at and say, I don't want to be like mom, I don't want to be like dad because I didn't like that, they might still be willing to follow your example, even though not in everything, because they knew that you taught them in a sincere way. So Paul finds himself being taught by a Pharisee, learning everything he could. But it wasn't just his parents that taught him, but we read in Acts chapter 2, verse 3, that there was someone else who also reached out to him. And that was a guy by name Gamaliel. Now, if you really look at the story of the Bible, you will find out that Gamaliel is not the most famous guy of the Bible. In fact, Gamaliel, from what we can tell and from what we know in this particular story, was just a teacher of the law. But what we find out once again about Gamaliel in Acts chapter 4, give me 1 second here. Oh, there it is. Sorry. Thought I left one of the references back there. Acts chapter 9. No, that's not it. Acts chapter 5, verse 33. My apologies for that. I wanted just to give you the only reference that we really have about this Gamaliel guy. Because I thought that it will make a good point. So I jotted in here, Acts chapter 5, verse 33. Here is what we find about Gamaliel. Now, the context of this story is Peter and John, they go and they heal this lame man by the temple, if you remember the story. And then they are summoned by the Jews and they're told, please do not speak about God anymore. And they're saying, no, we must obey God rather than man. And as the Jews are planning to hurt them, we get to verse 33. And we're going to read verse 33 all the way to verse 39. And here is what Gamaliel says. When they heard this, they were furious and wanted to put them to death. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel, a teacher of the law, who was honored by all the people, stood up in the Sanhedrin and ordered that the men be put outside for a little while. And here is now the Pharisee Gamaliel, the guy who will look and will say, well, why did you fall into this Pharisaic sect that wasn't really following God's law the way they should? They had turned religion into a burden rather than joy. That guy was so sincere in what he believed, once again, just like we mentioned, that he looks at the people there and he says, men of Israel, consider carefully what you intend to do with these men, referring to Peter and John. Some time ago, Theudas appeared claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, and all his followers were dispersed. And it all came to nothing. After him, Judas, the Galilean, appeared in the days of the census, and led a band of people in revolt. He too was killed, and all his followers were scattered. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone, let them go, for if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop this man. You will only find yourself fighting against God. How is that for words coming from a Pharisee? See, you can always tell when a person is teaching you stuff because they are strongly convinced in it. Because their heart believes in it, because they know that what they're telling you could change your life. So Paul was fortunate not only to have his parents, but to be also trained by one of the best teachers at that time, a Pharisee by the name of Gamaliel. And Paul followed him. In fact, as the story tells us, he became such a zealous follower of the Pharisees that he persecuted people. And Acts chapter 22 tells us the rest of that story as Paul shares it. But what I want us to realize here is that when the parents of Paul were trying to share with him the best that they knew, they had no idea what God was going to do through him, did they? Do you know what God is going to do through your son or daughter? Do you know what God is going to do? Those of you who are teachers or work with young people or interact with young people, do you know what God is going to do with some of our young people here? Do you even think that people like Billy Graham, people like Dwight Nelson, people like Mark Finley, they are people who were just little kids like everyone else, and someone touched them with the message of Jesus? Now, I don't know. If you think that you are prepared to train your child so they become really, great disciples of God, but what you can do with the sincerity of your heart is reach out to them and teach them just everything that you know about God. And that will be enough. For see, God does not require perfect teachers to turn kids into great disciples. God requires perfect people of influence. People who believe from their heart, not because they're perfect in their lives, but people who are ready to give their life to be influencers on others. Amen. By the way, in life we struggle to control people. Have you noticed that? That's the biggest issue that we face in life. We always want to be in control of us, of others, because we think that according to us we know best most of the time. And we work hard to control others. Is controlling others an easy work? No. Always takes effort, doesn't it? Yes. You have to plan it, you have to execute it right. There is a big difference between controlling and influencing. Many times our control is because we want to make others change according to what we want them to become. We can do that in a much better way if we try to influence them rather than control them. What is the difference? When you influence someone, as Alex Lickerman describes it, he's a medical doctor in one of the medical articles that he wrote on influence. He says if we just realize that influence is better than control, we will stop trying to change people. We'll try to influence them. We'll stop trying to control people. We'll try to influence them. And here is how he puts it. Instead of controlling, what we all have in abundance is instead of control, what we all have in abundance is influence, the power of which seems to function linearly. The closer personally and physically others are to us, the greater our influence will be over them, and vice versa. The closer personally and physically we are to others, the more we'll tend to influence them, he says. Then, even more interestingly, he notes, unlike our attempts to control, our attempts to influence don't require our conscious intent, which is why our ability to influence others is so much more important than our ability to control them. We are always exerting influence simply by being who we are, saying what we say, and doing what we do. The only real choice we have in the matter is whether or not the influence we exercise is good or bad. I love that statement. Because, see, influence doesn't require really a lot of effort. All it requires is for us to be who we are. Just be yourself, but be in close proximity with those you're trying to influence. Now, he does say there is a question that comes out. Who you are what you want others to be? Is your influence good or bad? That's something we need to consider, but influence is our ability to be who we are and let others just somehow be captivated or learn something by our close proximity that will influence their lives. Because we never know who is watching us. I love the old story, and I've shared it before, about the guy who was working in the produce department of the store, and there was this lady that came in, and she said, well, can I have a half of a grapefruit? He looked at her and said, what do you mean half of a grapefruit? We don't sell half grapefruits here, you know. Well, he didn't really say that. He was just thinking about it. And then he said, well, ma'am, I'm very sorry, but I don't think we have that. Let me check with the manager. And so he turned around and started walking. He didn't see that the lady understood him to walk with with him. And so he walks past the doors and he sees the manager. There is this crazy lady outside wanting a half of a grapefruit. And then he saw the mad face on his manager's face. He looks around, he sees the lady, and then he says, oh, and this beautiful lady wants to buy the other half. Can we do that, please? We don't know who is watching us, right? I've told you the story of going to pay my ticket in Golden, Colorado, and finding out that the lady I was ready to really get my frustration on was the girlfriend of the son of one of the head elders of the 3 churches we were pastoring together with the senior pastor. This is 4 hours away. I never knew. By the time I got back that evening to the prayer meeting, the head elder looks at me and says, oh, you met someone today, didn't you? We never know who is watching us. But that's why it is so important that we try to be who we are, who God has called us to be. People of integrity, true followers of God, doing the best that we can to influence those around us. That's what Paul's parents did. That's what Gamaliel did. But there are 2 other people who also impacted Paul. And one of those people is described in Acts chapter 9, verses 10 through 19. Acts chapter 9, which is the other, Acts 22 and Acts chapter 9 are the 2 chapters that tell us briefly the story of Paul's conversion. And again, we're not going to get into that. Those of you who might not have read the full story, Paul was going down the road and a flash like lightning appeared to him and he fell down just blinded. And God spoke to him and said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Paul knew, Saul, whose name was converted to Paul, Paul knew at that time that this was God speaking. Do you know how he knew that, by the way? Not necessarily at that time. He knew, though, that when he was persecuting the Christians, or the Way, remember? The Way was the name of the Christian movement that came after Jesus. But from what we know, Paul was born within the first 10 years of the new era or after Christ. Okay. So he was born somewhere between years 0 and 10, from what we can tell. So he was very young. He actually himself, as we'll see later on, says that he witnessed the stoning and the death of some of the disciples of Jesus. So he probably heard the preaching of Peter, because he grew up in Jerusalem. He have seen Jesus and heard about him as well. But he never really took it to heart to believe. So when he was going down the road of Damascus and Jesus came and said, Saul, Saul, Paul looked up and said, what do you want me to do, God? He knew that God was speaking because he had heard from the disciples that when they preached, they were telling the Jews, why did you persecute the very Messiah that God has sent? Now when God speaks to Paul, he says, no, God, that must be you. Everything I had heard and seen before must be true. And so Paul is challenged to go somewhere. And we go to Acts chapter 9. Let's read verse 10 through 19. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision, Ananias. Yes, Lord, he answered. And the Lord told him, go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. Lord, Ananias answered, I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, go, this This man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." Then Ananias went to the house and entered it. Placing his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you were coming here, has sent me so that you may see again and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized, and after taking some food, he regained his strength. And then the story continues of the life of Paul. By the way, basically in Acts, pretty much the second parts of the book of Acts is all about Paul and his ministry. And even though God shared here with Ananias that he will do great things through Paul, I'm sure that Ananias never really grasped the full extent of what God was going to do through him. Because at that time, Ananias knew that people who believed in Jesus were persecuted. He knew that Paul was one of these people who was persecuting his very own people, the followers of Christ. And so he was afraid, and God said, "No, you go and you talk to Saul, because he will be my witness for me." Sometimes God brings us in an encounter with a person that he has already prepared to accept to be his follower. And all he needs is someone to be willing to go there and talk to them. But maybe our response at times would not be much different than the response in this story, where we go and we say, "God, but these people, I don't really think they care about you. I don't think I can make a difference if I go." And God says, "No, you go and you touch their lives. Let me work through you, because I'm going to do whatever needs to be done in their heart. I just need you to be available and go." So 3 important questions for us to consider. Number 1, do you realize that you and I are a person of influence? And that influence could go for generations to come without us even knowing and being able to even dream about what God will do through some of the people we witness to today. When you have the opportunity to pray with someone, and by the way, I'm not just talking about serving others, that's important. I'm talking about really sharing the gospel, the good news of the gospel with them, that Jesus came, died, and rose again to pay for our sins. And because he rose again, he has provided this salvation for us. And soon when he returns, everyone who believes in him will be in heaven and live with him for eternity. Even those who are dead will rise out of the grave and have the opportunity to experience life again. Sharing that story with people, giving them hope in their lives, letting them know that God can transform, can change even the worst circumstances they have been in. When we are given that opportunity, are we willing to step up? Because it might be just an old lady that doesn't know how to read. But that might be give the beginning of generations of warriors for God. Amen. Who will reach hundreds and thousands of people. Amen. First question, are you willing to be a person of influence? Number 2, in order to influence others, are you really a person of integrity? Someone who can teach whatever you believe in from your heart. Even if it is not perfect. You are convinced so much about it that people can say, "Man, I see where you don't have everything perfect, but I still am willing to listen to you because I see that you really care, that you believe in this with all your heart." And let God correct the rest of the theology. See, Paul inherited the wrong theology. But under the influence of the Holy Spirit, everything he had learned, he was able to put in place, and he became the theologian that today we'll learn from about the awesome and true picture of God. So are you a person of integrity and sincere heart? And number 3, I want to go back to the story of Acts 22. And we're going to read verse 14. Well, let's start with verse 12, and we'll read all the way, verse 12 through 21, just to finish the story. A man named Ananias came to see me, and he was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, "Brother Saul, receive your sight." And at that very moment I was able to see him. Then he said, "The God of our fathers has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all men of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name." Once again, here Paul repeats the story with Ananias. And he says, he came and he not only called me, but from what we can tell from this story, he even baptized Paul. Once again, probably not thinking about how great Paul will become. And then the story continues, verse 17. "When I returned to Jerusalem and I was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance or a vision. And I saw the Lord speaking. Quick, he said to me, leave Jerusalem immediately because they will not accept your testimony about me." And here comes the third question. Are you ready to sacrifice anything and everything that you have or you're aiming at in order to make yourself be available to go and interact with other people who might be in need? To reach out to those who are in need. The verse says, the voice of God said, "Quick," he said to me, "leave Jerusalem immediately because they will not accept your testimony about me here." And even though this is a warning again, as we'll see in verse 21, God just pushes Paul to move out, to go and start doing his mission. But then he mentions something very interesting which is again in harmony with this third question I brought to you. Verse 19, "Lord," I replied, "these men know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him." You find a reference of one more person who was an influencer in the life of Paul. Who was that? Stephen. What was his job, by the way? Acts chapter 6, he was a deacon. Okay, he was one of the servants of the church, one of the people who were being the overseers of the church and helped the church run, its business. He wasn't an apostle, but he was willing to give everything of himself to be a witness, to a point that even when they were killing him, he said, "God, I'll stay faithful to you." Was he doing it to influence Paul? No, he was just giving his life for God because he was going to stay faithful to God no matter what. But someone was standing there watching all this and even enjoying it. And years later, when Paul was called to follow God, he says, "I remember that follower of yours. And maybe today I'm willing to follow you because of what I saw in the eyes of those martyrs. People willing to give their life for you." And by the way, we don't have time to read the rest of Paul's story, but if you read it, how does Paul's story finish? Do you remember? Where did Paul die? As a prisoner. From what we can tell, as a Roman prisoner. Giving his life for God because he knew that with words or with life you will always influence others. But Paul was ready. Let's go down to verse 21 and finish with that. "Then the Lord said to me, 'Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles.' And with this began the greater movement to expand the Christian church beyond the boundaries of Judaism." Peter began the work among the Gentiles. Paul really took it as a mission around the whole world, at the whole ancient world, at that time. Because Paul was willing to give everything that he had and cherished so he can make a difference in the life of those he met. I want to finish with the verse in Philippians chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. And it says, this is Paul again talking. Now that I have already obtained all things, let me read verse 4 really quickly before that. Verse 4 says, of Philippians chapter 3, though I myself have reason for such confidence, if anyone else thinks he has reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I more so. I was circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law of Pharisees, as for zeal persecuting the church, as for legalistic righteousness, our flawless. And now he says, verse 7, but whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ. Amen. Paul looks at life and he says, everything I was aiming for, everything that was driving me for personal benefits and reasons for prestige, I leave behind. Are you willing to give everything and put it on the line so you can be used by God to be a person of influence in His way? For many times we don't realize how the little things that we do for people around us will end up being used by God in greater ways, sometimes long after we are gone. For because of a pastor and a layman who dared to go and talk to my great-grandma, I'm so grateful because I can be standing here today. Amen. Who are the people of influence in your life? It's important to remember them, but there is a greater question. Who are the people who can say, you are one of the greatest persons of influences in my life? Who looks up to you? I'm very glad, and I have to say I didn't plan it this way, but we're going to take the time to just do something here at the end. I didn't know that a family that really was instrumental with my coming to U.S. to study and be a pastor will be here visiting with me today. In fact, they're my American family. They're my American mom and dad. And I have a brother, and every time I talk about him, I remember Timmy when he was little. He's like, what do you mean, your brother, Chicho Toshko? I'm like, no, I have another brother here, because I spent the first 5 years as I came here in U.S. with them. But they have done something great for me, and I have said that before to them, and I don't want to embarrass you guys, but I want to repeat it once again. I'm who I am today because of these people. Because they took me from a place where I could never probably have found a way to get a Christian education, much more, being an Adventist university. But I promised God, if I can just go somewhere and study and, finish my theology degree, I'll leave everything else. I'll dedicate my life to be a pastor. Might not be the perfect one, but I will dedicate my life to you. And I remember them coming to Bulgaria, and we were driving with the car, and they were saying, I forget which one of you said, well, so what are your plans for the future? And I said, well, I'm going to study art and, maybe do business here. And one of them said, well, how would you like to come to U.S. and study? And at that time, it wasn't just the study that was appealing, but to come to U.S. was a big deal. It was very hard to get a visa. It was very hard to get approved to get out of the country, period, still. And so when they said that, I thought, well, first I thought, no, it's not possible. But second, I thought, my English is not very good. Maybe I didn't hear them right. So I didn't respond. It was just kept the conversation going. And then they repeated it the second time. Well, we just wanted to see, if you would like to come and study, maybe we can look for ways and we can try and help you come there and, see if we can make it work. And I thought, no, they can't be asking me that. It was so impossible in my mind. And the third time they asked me, I was like, man, I don't think my English is wrong here. I think they really are asking me this. So I said, well, I feel embarrassed, to say that, but I said, well, if it's possible, that will be great. And that's why I shared as well my dream that if God lets me go and study in a Christian university, I want to be a pastor. I want to give my life to do that. And so that gave the beginning of a journey when I came here, when they helped me find some sponsors. Then I worked for Jerry for a while and really was able to go through my school and pay for my school with the work that was provided through him and with the help of a few people. But Jerry and Judy, I want to bring them up here for just a quick short testimony and interview, if you don't mind. Can I get you to get me one more chair? Yeah, he's stronger than you, Dave, so it's okay. Just joking. I want to bring you guys here and bring the mic here. Again, this was not planned. Two weeks ago, they surprised us by saying that they're going to be coming here to visit us for the first time in Texas. And so I already had set, the worship team knows the themes for this service. And I have seen something in you guys that I'm sure that other people are doing, but has always impressed me. And I wanted you to share it with the congregation. You didn't just help me. When I arrived in a house where there was already another person there, And this has been not just a one-time experience, but you guys have helped people over and over and over again. I want to ask Judy, especially you, because I know you're a kind of the driver in that. I remember Jerry saying, all I want to do is provide everything she needs to make this work, But what made you sacrifice part of your life to reach out to these particular people that you brought in, and who are they? If you can give us some examples of the type of people you reached out to.
Well, first of all, they're kids, and we didn't really go looking for them. People would just come and ask us if we could help out keep their child for a while, or a relative or friend's child. We, over the years, took in actually 28 kids, either long or short term.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? I mean, just and these were not easy kids, okay? And I know that because I lived with one of them. In fact, I had to, be pretty rough with him at times. I wouldn't share all the things that we've done, but these were not just regular kids. They were kids who came from either homes where they didn't have both parents or their parents didn't care. And I have seen just the difference you guys have made in their lives through that. But what I have really, wondered about is, how do you do it with such ease, I mean, what helps you just, I don't hear you complaining about us, and I include myself in that because I was one of the people there, and we're not, by the way, when you have someone at home who hasn't grown up there, it's not that easy, okay? And I'll probably let you share only one story, though. It's going to be censored, okay, of my being there. But what gave you the strength you always seem to have this smile, always seem to have this goodness in you as you are working with them. What helped you carry that ministry with smile and with passion?
It was something that was in me from a child. I remember as a very young girl thinking, if I could just have enough money that I could build an orphanage and take kids in. I've just always had a love for kids, and I think God put that there. And you said, I don't remember the terms you were saying, but how it was kind of tough and like a burden or anything. It wasn't. It was a joy.
Yeah.
I felt whole and complete when I had a bunch of kids around to love.
Well,
I think God gave me that.
The reason why I said it's a burden, because I joked with my son, I'm going to send him one of these next 2 summers now as he has grown up to learn how to wash dishes, okay? I'll let you, Judy, share that story,
Evidently, in Bulgaria, the women do all the work in the kitchen and the men do not do any. Well, in our house, everybody had their turn at dishes, and he was not real happy about it, and didn't feel like he should have to do it. I don't remember what I said, but I guess I sat down with you and talked to you about it. And every time we see him, he's talking about how he even does dishes now once in a while, and not real happily still, I don't think.
Yeah. Now I have kids to do them,
No,
so I don't have
you
to.
pass
right?
it on.
But I remember
you're a
that
good
moment, by the
husband.
way, and we talked about it yesterday. It came to my mind. How hard is it to sit sometimes with someone that you love and tell them, listen, I love you, but there are some things you need to know. Some things you need to change, some things you need to adapt. And in my home, my dad was washing dishes, but I have to say, I think I used it more as an excuse than anything, because a lot of guys don't wash dishes back home. But I didn't think it's something I should do. I would rather do other things. And you had to sit, and I was sharing with you how I remember that moment. You looked me in the eyes and you said that, and it didn't hurt or anything. It was just like someone caring, telling me, listen, you're a grown-up, you got to behave like one, And it was really powerful. But here is the reason I asked you that question, is because I have to give you another secret of this couple, and especially of Judy. You have had a very hard life health-wise.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about, just as much as you want to share, of things you have gone through, just to give a context of what I want to share.
I was in a
next.
head-on collision when I was 10 years old with a group of Pathfinders that were headed up to the camp in Colorado, and they thought I was going to die, expected me to die all weekend, actually. I had 150 stitches in my face and my head, and I found out later, pretty severe injury to my back. And between that and complications that just snowballed out of that, I've ended up with 42 surgeries and a number of different complications right now. I ended up with cancer, and back when they first gave radiation to Hodgkin's patients, they gave this full mantle, which is like from my ears down to my hips. This whole core of my body got it, and now I'm basically my insides are starting to fall apart. But
That's the side
what I'm
effects of
dealing
the
with.
initial radiation. Did you hear
Yes.
that? How many surgeries?
42.
Any of you have had more than 2 surgeries? Okay. Can you imagine going through that? And I'm bringing that up intentionally, following up the fact that you were always, I'm sure inside you probably didn't always feel like you are up to it, or it was that easy, but you never showed that pain to us. You never blamed it on the people there.
Oh, good.
It was
I was
always
trying.
Yeah, it was always when you see her. In fact, I learned about all that stuff from Jeff. About after 2 months after I have been there, and I think there was a day when you weren't feeling well, and we had to do a bunch of work. I know, just regular stuff, and I wasn't complaining, but Jeff, for some reason, he said, well, by the way, I need to let you know that sometimes mom feels really down, and he told me about, the medical issues. 2 months that I remember, I had no clue that you were going through all that you have constant pain, and to live, I have enough of a challenge to be nice when I just get a small headache. To live with pain all the time is very hard. And so I think, though, you kind of did. How many years did you guys take to take care of kids? It's been since 20 plus years. But now you're retired, right? You've done your mission. It's done. It's over. Now you can just enjoy the house and by yourselves.
Oh, I went through a period where I was actually really sick for about 3.5 years. I just was in bed extremely ill, not knowing if I was going to make it sometimes. Yeah. And I have slowly pulled out of that, and God sent somebody else to us recently.
All right.
Come stay with us. A boy that used to live with us when he was 10 years old, and now he's 18. And God helped us find him. I was looking for his address to send him a Christmas card. I finally was getting around to Christmas cards, and found out he was just living very close to us, so we invited him into our home. And I would really ask if you guys could pray for him. He's been going to church with us each week since, unless he's out of town, and he seems hungry. He's reading the Messiah book, which is I think it's a Desire of Ages rewritten. And also Jerry's given him great controversy to start to fight. He was wondering how the devil came around, and so he's reading those books, and I just pray that they speak to his heart.
Yeah. Jerry, I wanted to ask you a question as well. By the way, when I used to send emails, I don't know, you can't see from the light if Debbie is here, but I used to send emails to Jerry White, and sometimes their emails were right by each other, so I'll be like, Jerry, are you going to be there tomorrow? And he'll go to Jerry Westland instead of Jerry White because they both start with the W at the end, so he'll be like, no, I can't make it tomorrow, and I'm like, oh, you know. But it's, Jerry, it's easy to deal with kids, right? I mean, what do you do when some of those kids become challenging, especially at the workplace? I know that at least the 3 kids that I experienced to live with us there, besides your two, your son and daughter, they were a challenge at times as well. How did you manage to work through that, and what are some of the experiences that you can share with us that have enriched you through that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say Boyan, he was an easy keeper. So he was really a good one to have around. So if you see any flaws in him at all, you can blame me. It was probably me. So, but he was good.
Right?
But no, the kids, they were a real joy, a real pleasure. We had lots of good times. But yeah, it's challenging at times. I remember a couple of kids we had with us. Remember Casey and his brother? Mm-hmm. They had some challenges, and I remember some midnight hikes. I says, hey, if this doesn't change, we're going to take a hike tonight. And we live on 30 acres out in the country, wooded area. And so we would hike south about 1.5 miles through the woods, no trail, no nothing, and then hike across the road, back around the road. So it was about maybe a 5-mile hike in the snow, whatever. So that was, several hikes. That was part of the kid thing. But it was really, really rewarding, though. I mean, those the attachment that you feel there and the growth that you see in some of those kids, it's not always rewarding immediately. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's years down the road, and sometimes it's never in our lifetime. Yeah. But I'd like to just add another thing, too, as far as the influence. I know Judy, like she said, she's been plagued with a lot of health problems. And I know just recently she's kind of talked to me a few times. She said, man, I'm not of any value. What value am I now? I can't do anything. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I said, man, look at the people you have impacted. Just a year ago, she reached out to her former classmates from high school, and she put a reunion together with those people. And a lot of those people have kind of thrown God off to the side and said, well, I don't really have too much to do with God. But she has touched many, many of those people in a special way and reintroduced God to well, I don't know about reintroduced, but anyway, they're looking to God. They're looking to God. And I said, she's done this from her bed at home on her computer many times. And so there's all kinds of ways to impact people, to touch people. And so I guess I could just encourage you that in any way that you can interact or touch somebody's life, it's worth it.
Judy, how has it impacted your life? Any last...
Well, when I know that there's kids that are looking up to me, I am really very careful in what I do and what my influence is, more than I probably would otherwise. I probably tend to live a less selfish life in general.
And by the way, just in closing, we're a bit beyond our time, but you might think 30 acres, these people have it all, they don't need anything. You guys stayed in a little building. You lived where I lived really with you. In fact, we had to put a trailer there initially because there weren't enough beds, so you rearranged some bunk beds and all kinds of stuff that you put. It was a building that was built to be the garage, right? And you ended up living there for many years? 20 years, okay? And I have to tell you that I've seen it with my eyes and I've experienced some of your generosity as well. They could have taken all the money they make and put it into building a new home that you had drawn and you had envisioned, not for yourself again, but to be like a
It was for kids.
for kids, yeah, to be like a kid's home, place where you can bring more young people. But that didn't happen until about, when I was there, we barely poured the foundations the last summer I left. They gave everything so they can make a difference in the life of us, all those kids that have been in their place. When they could have spent it, on their own home. And even now I asked you, is the house complete? And everything yet, the porch is still not. And yet you continue to invest, even, from your own resources into people. And I have to tell you once again, my parents know that, and they say that I'm a different person because of the blessing you guys were for me.
Wow.
And I'm glad that God worked it out for them to be here. Because I wanted to make an appeal, but I think their life story is greater appeal than anything I could say. Because there is a lot more we can do. Even when we feel like we're imperfect, we don't have it all together, like you said, sometimes you feel like, well, what's my purpose? Sometimes we don't realize how great of things God does to us because we see ourselves, we're nobody per se that is famous, or sometimes we don't even think we have the abilities we need, and yet God makes a difference just by using who we are, even though you're a lot greater than you ever give credit to yourself for. Because I know you guys, but just in general, if we ever feel, guys, that we cannot do it, just if we make ourselves available to God, He will do miracles through us that we never thought, will happen. And the other big thing is if we feel like, well, we are not in a position to do it, we just don't have enough, God always provides. I remember, Jerry, I don't know if you recall that, but when I came here, I remember one time you saying, you know what, since we started helping kids so much, God is blessing the business. You started hiring more people, and God always finds ways to provide if we're willing to just be out there, and yet it has to be done from the heart.
Boy, and I want to add one more thing that God did. When there were kids coming, and I would be on my knees saying, God, I don't have what it takes. I don't feel well enough to do this. You're going to have to, and this is going to happen again. And I got on my knees and I said, Lord, please give me the strength when the kids are here. And as soon as kids would come, I would instantly feel better. And no matter how long you guys were there, I remember one time when one left and I sat down in the chair and I told Jerry, man, something's hitting me. I don't feel good at all. I can hardly get out of the chair. And he looked at me, he says, well, the kids just left. And it hit me, and God would give me the strength, and that's how it wasn't me doing it was God giving me the strength.
Most definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, guys. First for just what you have done for me, but also for being willing to share. And if these guys, especially Judy, with your health condition, even with the challenges you have faced lately here in the last 3-4 years, if these guys are able to reach out and continue to be a people of influence, God can use many of us who are in good health in a lot easier ways. So, as we live, I want to repeat once again the question: are you willing to be a person of influence? Because today, you might be reaching out to someone who might not just be a pastor eventually, but you might be reaching to someone who might be the next greatest evangelist in the world. People reached out to some of the people we look up to, the great people who have influenced this world, just like people reached out to Paul, and they made a difference, and so could you and I. The important thing to remember is that very often it is an invisible difference. Invisible influence, because we see only here at the moment, but what God sees is the future. And maybe 5, 7, 10 generations from now, after we are long gone, Jesus will come, will resurrect from the grave, and someone will come and hold our hand and say, we're here because you let God use you to touch my life. Won't you love to have that experience? You could. If we just make ourselves available for God to use us. May God inspire you to be a person of influence. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Please stand as we sing Redeemed.